guys, what's going on? Bobby here, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the ATA Network podcast. We are back here with another go-kart racer that you've probably seen wandering around the pit areas of the Gateway Carplex. You know, he started out just like most of us. He struggled. He didn't really show a lot of strength, but last year he really proved himself. I think before last year, he was probably one of the most underrated drivers in Ignite Senior at the Gateway Carplex. And last year, he actually finished second in the points to Adam Kreppen, which I kind of talked to him before the show, and I said that's probably just as good as winning a championship. But happy to have on the show this week on the ATA Network podcast, my good buddy of mine, Cory Osborn. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you, Bobby. It's an honor to be here.
It's really cool. You know, I always love, you know, passing you by in the paddock. You're very supportive of me. I'm very supportive of you, but we're not like BFFLs. We don't hang out all the time. So it's really going to be cool for me to get to know you a little bit more behind the scenes, get maybe some of the people at Carplex to maybe know a little bit about your background, what you're passionate about, and learn about how you got into racing. So without further ado, let's just jump into the first question here. How did you become interested in the sport of racing?
Oh boy. Well, I mean, originally racing was never something I'd ever took into consideration. It was something I always had. My parents always had on the television, and grandparents were huge NASCAR people. And I would just like walk by the TV and be like, why do you guys like watching these guys go around in circles? It just makes no sense to me. And my grandpa, he used to race go-karts back, like way back in the day, like back when they used to throw hay bales around downtown and pretty much just say, hey, go out it. So after he kind of introduced me and showed me some of my grandpa's karts and stuff like that, I was like, oh yeah, this is pretty cool, you know. But nothing really ever came about it. And one of my dad's friends from the hometown that we're from was like, hey, my son races go-karts. You guys should come check it out. My dad's like, they still do that? And Chet Kiefer, it's Colin Kiefer. He races a lot of the Route 66. He's a youngin'. But he was like, yeah, you should come out and check out one of these events. So we went to actually the Route 66 event in Springfield, and just kind of was walking around and stuff like that. And I was just like, oh, this is pretty cool, you know? And as soon as I said that, my dad's like, oh, you want to do it? And I was like, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed. And before I knew it, he had a kart in the garage the next week. I mean, he was just excited as I was. So it's pretty cool to have his support and his backing behind all of it, because he enjoys it just as much as I do. So that's kind of how it all began.
That's really cool, you know, and I think that as far as a son and father combo go, I really admire you and your dad. I mean, your dad, like you said, he's just as passionate about it as you are. He's there. He's trying to learn everything he can to help set you up throughout the race day. Also, you know, I think you and him also not only sharing that passion, but just that friendliness, you know, two of the most friendliest guys that you'll see in the paddock. And I think it's interesting to me too. This might be one of the first times on the show where it's not like a childhood dream for you to get into racing. So it's also really cool to see that, you know, maybe a newcomer to the sport of racing or a new fan of the sport, you know, being able to come into it and be as successful as you are, as successful as you have been recently. But it didn't always start out that way, and we'll get into that. But what kart did you select when you first got into karting? Where did you end up racing that for those first couple times? You know, how did the whole start in karting come about for you?
Well, my dad started me off in a Coyote Combat. And main reason we went with that is because after going to Springfield and stuff like that, that was just kind of the mainstream chassis everybody was running there. Like, oh, we want to get something like you mentioned in your previous podcast. You always want to get something that is friendly with the community that you're racing in.
Mm-hmm.
So we went with a Coyote just because, I mean, Brian Cassidy, some of the other guys down there in Springfield were running it and they knew about it. So we started off with that, and we raced at Springfield pretty much my first half season of karting. And then we kind of got more involved with the Gateway Carplex once we heard they had more of a spec series, because the Coyote Combat, nothing against them, the great kart. You don't see a whole lot of them anymore, but they're based in like New York, I think. So it was kind of hard to get feedback from, you know, like anybody as far as like an employee for Coyote, or to get any sort of feedback for the kart, how to adjust it, so on and so forth. Because coming brand new into the sport, I mean, I don't know if you are familiar with like an OTK kart, but like, I mean, I'm sure you are, but you know how they have like the dials on the front.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't really know how to even adjust any of that stuff. And we heard about the Margay Ignite series, and my dad's like, "Oh, well, to adjust the front end, all you got to do is just put these spacers in between each one of the spindles, and that changes the front end setup." I was like, "Oh, well, that's more simple than going by degrees and decimals and those little notches on the front end and all that fun stuff." So we're like, "Yeah, that's much easier." So we kind of started off in Springfield, and then once we heard about the Ignite series, find a little bit more user friendly, we made our way over to the Gateway Carplex. I did a test in one of the arrive and drives there. Just actually, Trevor Eggermeyer was working the Carplex out that day, and he went out in a rental cart, and I followed him around the track for a few times. And
Mm-hmm.
my dad's like, "Okay, well, this can make both of our lives a lot easier." He goes, "You got more of a broad spectrum of people to race with, because I mean, Springfield, they just had 206 Open, and you know as well as I do, 206 Open racing versus Ignite Series racing, it is much more competitive as far as finding the proper setup, I guess you could say."
Right.
And the level of competition in 206 Open is just severe. And when you go against chassis to chassis, there's so many different differences between each one of them. So it was just a much easier combination for us to just go with the Margay.
It's funny that you mentioned Trevor being there for your first arrive and drive. I was there as well. I was just working like the flag stand or something very simple, because I went back and I watched your YouTube video, because you used to do YouTube stuff back in the day, and I just thought it was interesting to be like, wow, like you haven't been in this so long, to the point that, I had been working at Carplex by the time you came and did that arrive and drive. So I thought that was interesting. Also, I just want to give a shout out to the Mid-State Kart Club, because that track, I've been there a couple times now for challenge, and I went down there, ran a tag kart around that facility. And it's actually a little bit closer to me where I live right now than Carplex, but I just kind of stumbled upon the Carplex community first. I think that I probably would have had a really good time if I had kind of ran more of the local stuff at Springfield. So can't say enough about those guys up there. A really awesome track, actually. A really fun track. You got the elevation change, a lot of technical corners. They run a little bit of different layouts there as well.
Yeah, I mean, Mid-State Car Club is also one of the most, I mean, new coming friendliest environment you can be at too. Everyone there is so kind and helpful. I mean, as well as the Gateway Carplex, but everyone's just so like homegrown. It's a small town. Everyone just brings out their carts and they race for a good time. They're not extremely competitive. So it's just a really good community for the newcomers.
Yeah, and I totally see that difference too. Like where a lot of the Carplex people, I mean, especially nowadays, it's come and grown to a reputation of being the home track of Ignite. And when Ignite was brand new, it kind of had that same feel-good vibe that Midstate would have had. But now Gateway has become really competitive. And so you've really got to be at the top of your level to be able to run really well at Carplex. And, we go and we that's a good segue. You get out of the Coyote, you move to the Margay, you jump into the Ignite series. What do you remember about starting out there? You came and ran the Ignite series late 2019 is when you got your feet wet in Ignite. What do you remember about those first races at Carplex?
Battling for last place. That was it. Pretty much that whole first season. It was like, all right, who can I pass and not, make upset. That was my main thing when I first got into it. I didn't want to make any sort of, I didn't want to burn any bridges. I didn't want to make anybody upset. I was very timid. Because like you said, everyone's out there. I mean, at the Gateway Carplex, even in 2019, I feel like it was just, if not at its peak, I mean, that's when you had Evan Stommer, Hunter Richardson, everybody was out there. So it was, I feel like, almost more competitive in 2019 than what it is in 2020, just because of the amount of killers you had out there. I mean, you had some insane competition, and I knew that. And so just from the morale of the community, I'd be like, okay, well, I don't want to make this person mad. I don't want to make this person mad. I don't know who this person is, so I don't want to make them mad. And so I just drove very timidly, and probably could have had a little bit better finishes and made some passes that I could have probably booked, but just chose to kind of back out of it and be that the guy in the back of the grid that's just there to try to learn,
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the thing too, is you've spent a lot of time at Midstate. You understand that Carplex isn't necessarily the same kind of atmosphere as what Carplex is. And so for you to kind of be patient those first couple races and kind of, get your rookie X off the back of the cart and kind of get a good feel for it and and know who you're dealing with. And I think most importantly with the Carplex community, I know you know this just as well as I do, just the family atmosphere of it. Spending those couple early weeks just kind of getting to know people and make some friends. And are there any specific people that come to mind when you think of like maybe your first couple families that you got friends with that kind of helped you along the way early out at Gateway?
Oh, I actually made out very well. I became friends with that little group that, you know, as well as I do, the Trevor Eggermeyer, the Evan Stammer, the Hunter Richardson, all of the really talented top of the grid drivers. So I fell into a really, really good friend group because they were good. And so I could ask them for tips and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. And I was getting good, solid advice along with yourself. I mean, you came in and I was very fond of you and how you went about yourself in the Gateway Carplex and how you were so involved. And yeah, I mean, the Trevor Eggemeyer, the Evan Stammer, the Richardsons, one of my best friends at this point, and yourself were literally my peas in the pod. Those are the guys that I went to the grid knowing that, hey, I can ask these guys anything. I can talk to them, tell them what I'm feeling. They'll give me some sort of good feedback, and I, as well as I do when it comes to asking it for advice in the karting industry, it's like you can go one or two ways. You're going to get the guy that's going to try to steer you the opposite direction. And then you got the guys that are going to try to actually help you. So I was lucky and fell into a very, very good friend group. And yeah, I'm just so blessed that I got involved with you guys. And yeah, I just couldn't thank you guys enough for what you guys did for me because I would have been totally lost without yourself, Stammer, Richardson, and Eggemeyer. I mean, those were my guys.
Well, and I think the other thing too is we've all been there at one point or another. It's one of those beautiful phrases of you don't know what you don't know, and so when you start out, you don't know anything, and so you can at least pass along a little bit of information. And I think that's we talk about different karting tracks and different communities in the racing world, and you actually mentioned kind of how cutthroat the Open 206 community is, where everyone's it's chassis against chassis. It's very much kind of keep your head down. You're not making a lot of friends out there because you don't want to share your notes. But in Ignite, it's just such a and I don't know how to really say this, but it's more of so like there's not a lot of setup done in the Margay, but it's more so about maintenance and being able to drive it very well. And I think that's probably something that you've learned throughout the ways. You probably found those couple things that you like to do to the setup just because of your driving preference. But when it comes down to it, Ignite is really just a series where you can hop in the cart, go out and try to just drive better than everybody else. And it's cool that from the one standpoint you're making friends with a lot of these people just because they're literally genuinely good people, but good on you for finding friends that were fast, friends that would tell you the right information and get you on the path correctly. I'm pretty sure if I give my one little nugget of advice in this podcast, it's okay to be friends with people that are just there to have fun and may not be performing very well. But if you can pick the brains of the guys, like you mentioned, Richardson, Stammer, these are guys that I was kind of leaning on to when I was starting out as well. And I totally agree with you 100%. 2019 was extremely challenging because you had, and especially towards the end of the year too, because, you mentioned Richardson, Stammer. I think of Lodicki. We got Eggemeyer right off of his junior success. And so it was literally the most competitive. By the time we got to 2020, we lost, Stammer wasn't really there much anymore. Richardson had won the championship, so he couldn't race anymore. And for me in 2020, it's what, at this point in 2019, I've gotten on the podium a couple times. I got a second place finish. At this point, it's like, okay, I'm just waiting to win. And that with those guys kind of leaving and getting out of the series, it kind of opened up the opportunity for me. I think what I experienced in 2019 with getting those little successes and podiums and kind of feeling it out, you kind of experienced that in 2020 to kind of help set you up for 2021. What did you experience in your, I'll call it your sophomore year, although you didn't really run a full year in 2019? We'll call your 2020 year your sophomore year. What kind of transitions or how did you feel? What changed from 2019 and 2020, and what did you necessarily might have learned to have given you that little bit extra success? You had a 10th place finish in the championship. You got a 3rd place finish, only one podium that year, but still, it's a lot better improvement than trying to battle out for last place.
For sure. The off season is really what I feel like developed my driving a lot. I downloaded iRacing, got myself a little simulator, and people can say what they want about simulation racing or whatever, and they may say, "Oh, it's not the same as being in a car," and it's not. But As far as developing your racecraft and being consistent, it helped me drastically. It helped me to an extent where I remember, I think it was after the first race of the Gateway Carplex, you were like, dude, you walked up to me with the camera and you're like, dude, what happened to you? Like, what did you do? And I was like, iRacing, man. I sat in my basement for the 6 to 5 months period that we had off the track and just raced on a computer, and it helped me in drastic sense. But I can say that was my biggest key to improvement in the 2020 season.
Yeah, and I remember coming up to you and being like, "How did you get so good?" Because in that I will totally stand with you on that. iRacing is such a good tool. I use it currently mostly for my Skip Barber race series stuff that I do in real life to kind of learn tracks that I may not have been to. We're going to a lot of tracks this year in the Formula Car that I have zero experience on, like many of the tracks that I was at last year. Obviously, not I have zero, sports car or Formula Car experience going into this. So any little bit of advice that I can get is really good. But for somebody that was new in a very competitive series like yourself at this point, you learn a lot about like just general racecraft, how to set up a pass, how to make moves. And, they don't have karting in iRacing, but I always like to compare the sports car equivalent of Ignite is like Spec Miata, a low horsepower. You can't depend on the power out of corners to get you going. It's very momentum based racing. And that's pretty much what Ignite is, just in the karting sense. So I'll double up on you on that. I totally agree that iRacing is a really good tool, even if you're just kart racing. So that another thing that I remember very specifically about 2020 was you getting that third place finish, because I had won that race. It was me, Trevor, and you. How did that feel getting on the podium for the first time after kind of having your little bit of struggles and trying to find success? You had a little bit of success here, a little bit of success there, but getting that podium, what did that mean for you in that time?
Oh man, it was incredible because like you just said, in being on the podium with you and Trevor, it was like, oh my gosh, these are two absolutely phenoms in the Ignite kart. So to be on the podium in general, but let alone with you two, it was just a feeling I'll never forget. And I just always remember taking those pictures and stepping off and just looking at those pictures over and over and over again, just sitting here thinking like, oh man, this may be the only for the farthest I get, this may be the best I got.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out not to be that way, luckily. But yeah, at the time I was just like, I'm just going to embrace this moment because this very well could be the best I ever do.
It's definitely one of those things like where I remember my first podium and my thoughts were, is this a fluke? Did I get here based on success, or did I just kind of end up in this situation? So it's interesting because that's a parallel, it's like, you don't know if you're ever going to get this opportunity again, or if you're actually just genuinely getting better. And of course you always hope that it's the later, that you actually just keep getting better. And you've actually kind of proved that. And that race, I'm sure you remember it quite vividly. I remember it very well myself, is you actually had qualified on the front row of that race. We did heat racing to determine it. So you put yourself there by racecraft to be in the front row of that race. I kind of pushed you out to the front. You led it maybe the first 2 or 3 laps, and then me, Trevor, and Lodicki got away, and then you were able to kind of make your way up to the front. And was this the race that you spun out coming across the line? You were so excited. You had your fist up in the air and you locked it up, got in the wall. Your first podium finish.
Yeah. It's something, that's another thing I'll never forget. Yeah. I came across the finish line. I was so excited and I was fist pumping, and it was my first time ever coming across the finish line, fist pumping for one. And so I had one hand off the wheel and came into turn one, and I just was like, oh shit, turn one is right here. So I hit the brakes real hard, backed it into the wall. And I remember Justin Elders was standing right there, and he just looked down at me, and I looked up at him, and he just gave me a big old hug, and I just went on my way. But yeah, that's something I'll never live down. And Keith Sharf, after my first win at the Gateway Carplex, I remember hearing him on the intercom after watching some of the videos that you actually took of me coming across the line.
Mm-hmm.
I came across and I was fist pumping, and he goes, all right, and the fist pump, both one hand's on the wheel. Okay, both hands back on the wheel. There we go.
It's so good. I'm gonna, if you guys want to see this video, I'm gonna link it in the link dump. But it's one of the races that we ran in 2020. It's a vlog, and Matt Zagaitis, my videographer, can't say enough good things about him, but it's funny because I come across the line, Trevor comes across the line, and then you see Cory come across, and as it's panning on me in turn one, you just see a cloud of smoke, and Cory goes off into the turn one wall. That's one heck of a way to make your mark on your first podium finish. Was there anything else that stood out to you in your 2020 season that, marked it a pretty good year for you?
Not a whole lot other than that. I mean, that was really my only sort of success race that I had, making myself on the podium. I mean, I'm sure there was other times and throughout the season that I had that I just can't recall at the moment, but that's really the only one that comes to mind in 2020, just because I feel like I always, after that first podium, I was always expecting myself to do the same to equivalent of another podium, and I don't think I ever got one after that. So I always just looked at that season like, that was okay. I got one podium and I held myself to that standard. I never got to that standard again. So it just kind of felt like a bum year, but yeah, 2020 was all right. I don't recall too many insane events. Obviously, getting more involved with the Carplex family, that drastically increased. I was, made so many more friends, became so much closer with a lot of families, and that was really what I recall from 2020. Was getting a lot more familiar with a lot more faces, and getting a little bit more known to the Carplex, getting to know people more.
Yeah, definitely in 2020, you were more of a regular rather than in 2019 kind of being like a who is this kind of guy. And
Yeah.
and seeing your success and your improvement from 2019 to 2020, you astronomically improved from 2020 to 2021. I once again was asking myself after the first race of 2021 at Gateway, how did Cory get even better than he was last year? Like, you went from 2020, maybe getting on the podium, only getting one podium finish. You ended up getting on the podium 6 times in 2021. Like I've said multiple times now, you finished second in the championship at Gateway to Adam Kreppen, which in my book is a championship. And the crazy thing is, you go out to that first race, and I was there. I didn't know if I was going to be there because of my new job at Skip Barber. So I came out and I filmed it, and I'm sure, and you're going to give me like, thanks Bobby for filming my first win. Like, it was so cool. But I was so excited for you. I was filming in the middle of the racetrack, and I ran to the scales to congratulate you because I knew no matter if it's you or maybe it's Hunter Richardson, Brendan Lauer, Adam Kreppen, Stephen Kart, I can name anybody. Seeing somebody win their first win, no matter who it is a very special moment. So that was a very cool moment. What was that first win like for you?
I mean, that was by far probably the most memorable race that I've had to date. Just because obviously you had it all broadcasted, and I cannot thank you enough for capturing some of those memories, like me coming off the scale and giving my mom and my dad a hug. You got that all on camera, and that's still clips I use to this day, and almost brings a tear to my eye because it's such a wholesome moment. After my dad he'll just put in countless hours on these karts, and I can never thank him enough for what he does. Like I said, he's more invested than me half the time, and it's just to capture that moment. It was really something else, and I couldn't even explain the emotions I had coming off that scale. I remember you were joking around, and I was on the scale, and I was like, he took a long time, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, am I good? And you go, you didn't make weight. And man, my heart just sunk to my stomach. I was like, are you kidding me? Not a funny joke, Bobby.
Especially not in the moment, man. You win your first race, and in my recollection of like my own first wins, you're always thinking like, how am I going to screw this one up? That that would be the worst, is to come across the scales and not make weight. And of course, I'm always like, I actually really enjoy, I'm going to kind of get more on the personal route, but it ties in with this. The past year, especially 2021 for me, I didn't do a lot of karting. I did, I did like maybe 1 or 2 Ignite races, maybe a super comp or 2. And I really genuinely enjoyed race days like that, where I wasn't racing and didn't have to worry about the stress of racing. I could just focus on video production and to be able to tell kind of the whole Carplex's story rather than just focusing in on myself. And those vlogs, I think, from last year were some of my favorites that I've done. And so it was really cool to be able to kind of share in that moment and and be a comedian. and to be able to like scare you and think that you didn't win the race because you were underweight. But you really set the tone with winning the first race of the season. And like I already mentioned before, you got 2 second place finishes, 3 third place finishes after that. You only were able to mark that 1 win, but still just a really dominant season. Um, what what was that? What was that first win like for you as far as kind of setting you up for the rest of the season? Because every time you came out after that, you just looked like a different Cory. You looked like maybe more confident. What was it that really flipped the switch for you after winning that first race? Did it kind of prove to you that this is something that you can do?
Yeah, it proved to me that I like, hey, I am capable of doing this. But also, like you've said in the past, after you got your initial win at Whiteland, it does set a tone in your head and your mindset that it's that development of confidence. You know, you get that confidence where you're like, I am able to do this. I am good. I am able to compete. And I think that was the biggest key for me was the confidence. And Richardson will be the first to say, like, confidence is key in racing because half the time, I mean, it's more racing is such a mind game where you have to keep your head on straight. If you don't have your head on straight when you're racing, you're not going to race well. Bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can maybe race frustrated and see a little bit of red mist, and maybe that may not be bad. And I'm a prime example of that. I mean, I have sometimes the most difficult time keeping my emotions, and it does help from time to time. But as far as keeping a level head when you're racing is so key, and confidence. If you have confidence in racing, it's literally the biggest stepping stone that you can get is in getting that first initial win or that first initial good finish where you finally get that realization that you are out there for a reason and you have every right to be out there as everyone else. That was the other thing. It was like for the longest time, I always felt like, all these guys got these fancy helmets and Stommer with the Stilla sponsor and all this stuff. And I was like, man, these guys are out here because like almost like they have to be because they're representing a brand, and I'm just out here in my HJC motorcycle helmet. I just always felt like not like I was supposed to be there. I was just there for fun where these guys were there trying to make a living. And then once I finally, got that initial win, got out of that motorcycle helmet, got that ambassadorship with Rooks, it finally made me feel a lot more validated and a lot more of a reason to be out there that I deserve to be out there just as much as everybody else.
Well, and let me just also say, Rook's helmet's solid helmet. Really good supporter of Cory Osborn. Skip Barber Racing School helmets are all Rooks's as well. So I'll double down
Oh, there
on
you go.
that. I'll say Rooks is a good helmet, good quality helmet. I'm a Zamp guy through and through, but I don't have an ambassadorship with them, so have to reach out to them. But no, you're completely right too, and I think that's another thing. Kind of the Carplex side of everything being intense. We talked about in the beginning of the show, and you kind of helped me realize something. Mid-state versus Carplex versus like Open 206 stuff is kind of that's kind of like a stepping stone, if you will. Like whereas I always want to think that Carplex is family friendly fun, which it is. It's very competitive, and when you add in the fact that by 2021 you've got a lot of guys that have now moved on from Ignite and into bigger and better things. We're seeing, Evan Stommer, Spike Kolbecker, they were racing Road to Indy last year. I was in the Skip Barber Formula car. Now you're seeing a lot of other guys too. Like primarily I'm thinking of Trevor Eggemeyer that's going off and doing racing schools. I mean, you're seeing a lot of big things outside of karting happening to these guys that are racing primarily Ignite karts, which is something that you don't really see. If you want to make it to the next level in racing, you're seeing a lot of guys going out and doing, super nats or doing a lot of 2-cycle stuff. Like you've got to be one of the country's best 2-cycle drivers before you can prove yourself to get into a big car. And we're seeing a big kind of culture shift to where that doesn't really necessarily matter. You've got enough people that believe in the bread and butter of what Ignite really is about proving driver skill. And that's kind of helping promote people into bigger things. So that's kind of a side note, but I think that's another cool thing to mention. Another thing that you did in 2021 and you also kind of had a little bit of success in as well was running the Ignite Challenge Series. Was 2021 your first kind of run through the Challenge Series?
I think so. I think in 2020, I may have done like the mid-state event and obviously the Carplex challenge event, but I think those were the only two I competed at as far as challenge goes in 2020.
So you go out to do the full challenge in 2021. You ended up getting a podium at Cincinnati. You finished 7th in the championship. Talk about your challenge series that you had last year, and what were some of your, what was some of your favorite tracks that you went to? Obviously, with the podium at Cincinnati, I would think that one ranks up for you.
Yeah, for sure. Cincinnati is an awesome facility. I mean, I don't know if you know, but they're expanding the whole track. So next season, or at least the following season, I know for sure they're going to have a completely different configuration, like a Newcastle vibe. But I really enjoyed. I could say I really liked Autobahn. Autobahn is a really neat track. I did all right there, and if I feel like I wouldn't have sent it in on Ken Williams in the final and took both of us out of the race, I probably could have a little bit better of a finish there too, as you got me on camera throwing my neck protector in my seat after that final. So, but other than that, I really enjoyed the Autobahn environment. As you know, it's a country club, so like it's got the nice sports cars running on the sports car course, and
hmm
it's just a really cool facility. Honestly, I enjoyed Autobahn a lot.
Yeah, I think Autobahn's one of my favorites. I mean, that was the only challenge race I did last year, and that was more so just by convenience of my schedule allowing it. But yeah, Autobahn's really fun. It's a track that I've been fast at, but have been unable to seal the deal, like as far as getting a podium finish. So I really like Autobahn. I honestly, with Cincinnati though, I couldn't even tell you what direction the track goes in. I don't even know anything about that track. So it's interesting to me to kind of hear that there was a lot of positive feedback from Cincinnati. So I'm glad that they found another new exciting track to join the Ignite Challenge series. So it's going to be cool to see. You're going to be, I believe, running in it again this year, along with a lot of other different stuff that you got going on, which we'll get into here in a moment. But one final thing that we'll talk about, touch here real quick in 2021, and we've been talking about this kind of all podcast long, but just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on you winning the 2021 Racing Forward Adult Driver of the Year award. I was there at the banquet this year, which because you get the 2020 awards in 2022. That's how that works in racing, and it was cool for me to be there to witness it because a couple reasons. One, I was the 2020 Racing Forward Adult Driver of the Year award, so it was kind of felt like a passing of the torch on my behalf to another guy that has now shown success and strength in the series after, maybe not being the best, having the most improved season. And it was also another cool point for me too, because I actually kind of had a little bit of I don't want to say I had feedback in who won the award, but it's funny when Keith Scharf comes up to me and he kind of tells me who these people are that are winning the special awards, and he wants kind of like my initial response. And like the only thing I could say when he said that he was going to put you as the Racing Forward Adult Driver of the Year, all I could say was yes, because you look up and down the adult drivers in all the classes, right? This isn't just Ignite Senior, but this could be Masters or Legends or Heavy, and you just look up and down at all the names and you really think about who's really genuinely improved, and man, you've really improved. So what was some of your initial thoughts? I know that you were surprised because as soon as they went to start describing the awards, I was watching you, and I think your dad was kind of like looking over at you and saying, "Hey, he's talking about you," and you're like, "No, no," and it wasn't up until they said your name is when you kind of realize like, wow, it's me. So what are your thoughts about winning that Racing Forward Driver of the Year award?
It was a huge honor. I mean, it was something highly unexpected. At the same time, I felt like I was deserving because, like you said, coming from my 2020 season and into 2021, I did feel like I improved, but I didn't feel like I was going to be out of all of the, different classes in the Ignite series. I didn't think that I would be Ignite Senior being the one that got it. So to be chosen as that award, it was a huge, huge honor. And I remember when we were at the Gateway Carplex at the end of that season, the 2021 season, we were talking about, all the different awards that people get. And I was like, yeah, it'd be pretty cool if I got the, race like most Ford driver of the year. And you were like, yeah, I could definitely see that. And then come to find out when they called my name, I just see you and you're just like bowing down to me. You knew as soon as I got it. And it was great. It was so awesome. It was a huge honor as well. I couldn't thank you and Keith Sharp and everyone else that goes into nominating those awards to choosing me. So
Mm-hmm.
Huge honor.
Well, and that's another thing too is like there's a lot of awards like the sportsman awards and there's awards like that are very much, I don't want to say opinionated awards, but kind of it's more based on your personality. This award is more so based on results. And so, I appreciate you thanking me, and I'm sure Keith appreciates you thanking him and all that. But you kind of wrote that one yourself. I mean, literally, I spent a lot of time thinking about it after he told me, and I was like, yeah. I mean, there's literally nobody else has improved as much as you, and it's very impressive too. Because I remember when you first started, and like you said, when you were battling out for last place, and I was at this point being a podium contender, I definitely did not put you anywhere near my radar, right? Like I kind of just wrote you off. And if I were to jump into an Ignite cart now in this field, I got to look at you now. It's like, okay, well, you've changed a lot and you've learned a lot, you and your dad both. So you were very deserving of that award. And now you take, everything that you've learned now over the past, 3 years of karting, and you look to 2022. Before we kind of jump into the karting stuff, I kind of want to mention and congratulate you on your new career that you have. You actually just joined not too long ago Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan Racing as a graphics installer. How'd you land that job, and how's it going for you, man? You've moved out from this area and you're over in Indianapolis. How's that all going for you?
It's going really well. It's really cool to walk into a race shop for your occupation. It just makes you feel like it's less of a job. But getting that job it was kind of random. I was scrolling through Indeed because I was down here and my girlfriend lives down here, and I was wanting to move down to this area just because I knew the racing opportunity was a little bit more populated here. And I was just scrolling through, and I saw this Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan. And to be completely frank with you, I didn't watch a whole lot of IndyCar, so I didn't even know who Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan was.
Mm-hmm.
I just saw IndyCar and BMW GTE IMSA, and I was like, oh, I know both. I know of both of those series. It was a very popular racing series, and I just called him, and I was just like, hey, I saw you guys have an ad on here for a graphic installator, and I was just inquiring about it. And first time I called, I got the secretary. Her name was Barb, and she was like, "Yeah, let me see if I can get you the head of the graphics department. He'll talk with you about it." And I feel like she walked up there and was like, "Hey, there's a young man on the phone, and he wants to talk." And like, I think I applied on Indeed, and I applied, and it asks you how many years of experience you have in being in a professional race team. They weren't looking for somebody with absolutely no experience in the
Mm-hmm.
graphics field, so they pretty well marked me off the list. So the first time I called, she didn't even get me through to the head of the graphics department. I'm pretty sure Doug, which is my boss, head of the graphics department, was just like, "No, I saw that guy's resume on Indeed. I don't even think it's worth talking to him. We're looking for someone a little bit more experienced that can actually bring something to the table." And then a couple of days, or actually a couple of weeks went by, and I called again later that week, and he was out of office. And then I called again the following week, and I was like, "Hey, I'm still inquiring about that position you guys have available." And finally, he got on the phone. He was like, "Hey, man, I'm the head of the graphics department, and I was just wanting to contact you about uh, the position you're inquiring about. And to be completely honest, I just don't know if you're exactly the fit that we're looking for." All this stuff, and I kind of went into this spiel of like my passion for racing and how much I want to be involved, and how I moved down to this area specifically to look for a racing occupation. And once I kind of gave him my background and showed that desire to come in there, and how I am insanely detail oriented. I've worked in not in graphics, but I've done a lot of, pinstriping for my dad's dealership,
Mm-hmm.
and detail orientation in the graphics department is insanely important. So I just kind of stressed that to him, and he was like, by the end of the phone call, he was like, "You know what? Come in and talk to me. You're the only person that has persistently called about this." He goes, "We've got many applicants, but you're the one that has consistently showed that you have a passion for it and that you want to do it." And so I went in there, and walking into that facility, I mean, it was nuts. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. So to go into there and just not be like, "Oh my God, look at this, look at that, look at this, look at that race car, look at this race car," and seeing all these people in these Honda uniforms, and
Mm-hmm.
it was just insane. And so I walk in, they bring me up to the offices, and he sat me down. We talked. I think I was there for that interview for 6.5 hours. He brought me to like all of the CEOs and the head directors and the crew chiefs and all this stuff. And I feel like he was just trying to get the validation, like, hey, am I crazy for hiring this kid? Like,
Right.
you tell me, you know? And I feel like I made a good impression. I was trying to be as professional as I could
Hmm.
and just explain my desire and passion for it. And I think that's really what fed into them giving me the job. Um, but yeah, that's kind of just how it went. And it's been great. It's so cool to just walk around the shop and now to the point where I'm somewhat comfortable in the environment. So I go up and I walk up to the shop guys, the mechanics, and I'm like, oh, what's this thing do? Like, how does this work? And
Hmm.
it's something else to be a part of something like that. And I don't know if you're aware, but we're building a whole new facility over in Zionsville. We're in Brownsburg right now. We're building like state of the art complex over in Zionsville, which if you just Google Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan uh, new facility, it'll come up on Google, and it is the most insane architectural building you've ever seen in your life, especially for like a racing shop. It looks like
Hmm.
something you'd see in like the Charlottes, like the NASCAR shops and stuff like that.
Oh,
Just a
wow.
beautiful facility.
Yeah,
It's so
I
cool.
just pulled it up. It looks insane. Because there's
Yeah,
a lot of those
it's
indie teams and even some like NHRA teams are based out of Brownsburg. So it's interesting to me
mhm.
that they're moving out of it. But man, that new facility, you're gonna be wrapping some cars in a pretty nice building there, Mr. Cory Osborn.
Oh yeah, it's going to be really neat. Like you said, it is kind of weird that they're moving out of that area because like you just said, there's so many different race shops. Like you pull down the boulevard that we're stationed on right now, and it's got Tony Stewart's quarter midget
Hmm.
shop. It's got the NHRA. It's got the IMSA cars with Wayne Taylor's IMSA GTE cars right beside their shops right beside ours. So it's just racing like Boulevard, pretty much race shop Boulevard. You got all these race cars. You'll hear them starting up, and it is really cool. But at the same time, I think they're just they've finally gotten to the point where they've established like their own thing going, and they're a well-established IndyCar team. I mean, not very many of the teams have three cars, and so we got three cars, and we got some killer drivers. I mean,
Hmm.
Christian Lundgaard, Graham Rahal, and Jack Harvey. I mean, we got some really talented drivers. So I feel like they're trying to like kind of just get out of that branch, and separate themselves and make themselves a little bit more individual, rather than just being like with all the other race teams. They want to get themselves out there, and they've done an insane job. It's a great place to work at.
Oh, for sure. I can't imagine. I mean, and like you said too, just being you being passionate about racing, but then actually being able to work and like live, breathe, eat in the racing industry, it's a whole different thing. And it's cool now that we kind of share that environment with each other. And it's also really good advice, and it's interesting to hear. And it doesn't surprise me how persistent you were about getting that job position. There's a lot of people that, they swing for the fences, they make that one attempt, they get rejected, and they just kind of say, well, screw it, I'm going to move on to the next thing. You kind of assumed failure, but you were like, you know what, I'm going to show this guy that, hey, I'm his man for this job. And the other thing too is I think that, and this is a good thing for me and how I kind of landed with Skip Barber, and I think this is another thing that's true for you, is this theory, this idea of passion is greater than experience. If you're willing to come in and work your 12-hour shift or whatever, and you're willing to learn whatever the job is just to be able to get into that career field, that you will succeed way beyond the guy that may have all the experience but absolutely zero passion. I think you've kind of proved now, being someone at the beginning of this that doesn't really have much of a passion for racing, didn't really understand what it was all about, seeing people watch it, seeing your family watch it and be like, well, what are you doing watching people go around in circles? And now being so passionate and actually working in the industry while also racing at the same time. I think that's a really awesome transition that you've made in such a short period of time. So I commend you on that, Cory. That's really cool to kind of see that full circle for you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, I could not give enough thanks to Doug over at Ray Hall Letterman. He really went out on a limb to give me that job and to give me that opportunity. And I couldn't thank him enough. He really did not have to do what he did, and he took a major risk of his own job. I mean, you got to look at everyone else looking down on him, the higher up people that
Mm-hmm.
are CEOs and stuff like that. They're like, what are you doing hiring a 22-year-old kid that has zero experience in the graphics department on a professional IndyCar team? Like, and he took a risk with me, and I cannot thank him enough.
So my last question here for the regular show before we jump into some of our listener questions. Yep, we got listener questions. So if you're not following me on the socials at ATA Network on Facebook and Instagram. You can actually kind of see who's going to be on the show ahead of their arrival on the show, and ask them some questions. So we got some of those for you, Cory. But before we get into that, let us know kind of what your racing plan is for this year. I have your schedule pulled up. I think the biggest addition for you, there's a lot of things here to note, and I don't want to take your thunder, but most importantly, your relocation to Indianapolis, obviously your home track now being Newcastle. So it'd be interesting to kind of get your thoughts on that facility. And also your addition of a 2-cycle kart. Somebody must have caught the bug when they tested Adam Kreppin's kart late last year.
Oh yeah, 100%. That was such an addicting feeling. And I remember stepping off and I just looked at my dad and I'm like, hey, I'm buying one of those next season. You need to figure out how to work on it. And that's pretty much how it all went down. And, but yeah, we kind of relocated home tracks. Don't get me wrong. Gateway Carplex will always have a special place in my heart. And we definitely plan on making a lot of the events down there still. But we do plan on going to Newcastle events just a little more often, just because of the KA field. Super comp, we're probably going to run a little bit of the super comp down there in Gateway, but I mean, I don't think we're going to probably have more than 10 carts down there in the super comp series. And I think Newcastle has 15 to 20 carts in their KA field. So we just wanted to get a little bit more of a broad spectrum of the grid. So we wanted to have a little bit more competition and see where we stack up. But yeah, I'm really excited to see how this 2-cycle thing goes.
So you're going to be running KRA. You're going to be running some of the challenge series, some super comp, some Route 66 stuff. And kind of going through here, you're going to be racing Newcastle, Gateway, Autobahn, Cincinnati. You got a busy schedule this year. What are you looking forward to the most running this year? Do you feel like you're looking forward to the 206 stuff a little bit more since you've got all this experience? Or are you excited to try the new thing in the 2-cycle kart?
It's kind of both. I could say I'm more excited for the 2-cycle stuff. I'm always one of those guys that loves to try something new and to learn and expand my knowledge. So that was the whole point of getting into the 2-cycle. Was I don't feel like I capped my knowledge with the 4-cycle stuff, but I feel like I learned the majority of the tips of the trade. I feel like I know most of it, and I want to broaden my knowledge of racing. So that's the main reason we got into 2-cycle. But 4-cycle, like you said, it's going to be nice to be able to go in there knowing that I am a respectable name and that I deserve to be out there just as much as, anyone else. So I'm excited for both. But really looking forward to the KA stuff and the 2-cycle stuff.
Yeah, and one last note on my behalf before we jump into these listener questions. I think you running the 2-cycle is just going to enable you to be that much better in the 4-cycle as well. I mean, just being able to get a different thing, whether it's a 2-cycle kart or like what I recommend for a lot of guys at the local level here at Gateway, even if they just buy the soft tires and go out and run super comp, just to be able to experience two different things. You just learn a lot more different things. You have these tools that you put in your toolbox, and when you feel something on one, you might be able to relate it to something else you felt on whatever the other thing is, and to be able to kind of pull from that. So I think I think this year's going to be a good year for you. I'm excited to kind of watch it from the sidelines, see how you're able to adapt to the 2-cycle, and hopefully you'll have some experience in the 4-cycle as well, and I'm sure you will. So moving in here, before we end up the show, we're going to go to some of these listener questions. Scott McClendon asked, what's it like transitioning from 4-cycle to 2-cycle? So we're talking about that those 2 carts you're going to be running this year. What were some of those challenges you faced when you jumped in the 2-cycle for the first time that you may have had bad habits from the 4-cycle?
I could say the main difference is being the power, obviously, but the acceleration of the carts, momentum is still important in the 2-cycle, but it's not quite as important. You get a bobble or you may exit a corner a little bit more wide than what you would in a 4-cycle, and it would really hurt you in the 4-cycle. Where in a 2-cycle, you're able to put that power down and make up that ground. And I also noticed with these, I don't know if it's just an OTK versus Margay thing. I mean, the 2-cycle of the KA that we got now, it's a Cosmic. So it's an OTK, first time driving an OTK. And I don't know, you've driven an OTK, haven't you? You've driven Kreppin's.
Yeah, I've drove Kreppin's kart before when you tested it. And then I also have had experience on Rockwell's kart. So he's got an old OTK, but still an OTK nonetheless.
Yeah. And I just feel like I'm not bagging on Margay or anything like that, but the quality difference between those two chassis. I know Margay specified
Mm-hmm.
4-cycle chassis, so that's not really what they're made for. But the quality difference between the two chassis, as far as just the feel of the wheel, the braking in the OTKs, I feel like are so much more controlled.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's the main thing is the braking is what I noticed the most, is being able to actually press down the brake. You know, you have 1,000 different positions on the gas pedal, obviously with the K versus a 4-cycle where you just kind of mash it and you don't have to worry about your throttle position quite as much. Where on the KA, you have 1,000 different positions in the throttle, but you also have 1,000 different positions in the brake.
Mm-hmm.
So you can push that braking point a little bit further and not have to worry about that lockup near as much. I mean, I've only got a couple test sessions now with Creffin, and including mine at this past weekend at Newcastle. But that's the main differences I know right now. As far as adjusting the carts and stuff like that, I have a feeling Margay is going to be a little bit more simple to being adjusted.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm excited to see exactly how much of a difference I see as the season goes on. Right now, I just basically feel the braking in the acceleration is a little bit more precise. You don't have to be as touchy with it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. And I think that what you're feeling is kind of a combination of just what they build for a 2-cycle versus a 4-cycle, and that's why it may feel a little bit better. But then also the fact of, like, you know, OTK's building carts that have to battle against other carts. When you have an Ignite cart, I mean, it's just got to make sure that it's spec to other Ignite carts. So it's like you mentioned, you know, it's two different audiences that they're building carts for. But yeah, man, that OTK, I'm gonna bag you on this, but you need to bring back your YouTube channel because we need some onboard footage of this cart, man. I want to see you wheeling this thing, and I'll be looking forward to when you bring that thing down to Gateway, and it'll be a good show. The last question here for the listener questions comes from Joe Palmisano. Shout out to the Wisconsin family up there that I love so much. We see you planning on some Route 66 events. Do you guys plan on coming down to Badger for the Route 66 event? So I know your current schedule doesn't show Badger Kart Club up there in Wisconsin, but you got any additional plans that maybe you can sneak a trip up to Badger?
There's a possibility. We did look into it. The Wisconsin, I think there was a couple other Route 66 events that are just a really long distance, and so we didn't really want to make that. It was kind of a budget thing, you know, if like we could do 2 or 3 KRA races or do one Route 66 event.
For sure.
And so the Wisconsin Badger Kart Club is something I would obviously love to go and try. But really the only thing that's holding us back from that at the moment is just the distance. But I would love to go up there and see those guys and race with them. Love the Palmisano family and what they do. They're insanely nice people. So if we do get the chance and maybe a couple KRA races get canceled or whatever, because obviously it rains a crap load here in the Midwest. So if we get a chance, we may sneak our way up to Wisconsin.
It's definitely a must go to track. I was fortunate enough last year to be able to sneak over there for one of their club races, and just the entire Palmisano family, you know, Joe, Mary, Goggles, they're all a great group, and all the people that are local at the track too. It was pretty impressive to see how many people actually kind of recognize me from my videos. And it's not an Ignite track. I mean, it's not.
Oh, you're an icon. You're an icon, Bobby.
Okay, well, I don't want you. I didn't invite you to stroke my ego over here, but it was impressive to me to see kind of the acknowledgement that I received from there. You know, it's weird. It's like going to a track that's not a Margay track, but allowing the Margay guy to be welcomed. So it was a very, like, I didn't expect going to a track that wasn't a Margay, you know, authorized dealer, if you will, to get that kind of response. So it was really cool, and be able to race with the senior class drivers up there. It was just a really fun time to be able to hang out with the Palmisano family. Like you said, they're just really classy, fun people. So that's it for the show right now, Cory Osborn. First off, just I want to thank you for jumping on here. It was really cool to kind of talk to you and hear your story and get through your racing career and talk about your 2022 plans. I got 2 things to end the show on here real quick. First off, I know you have sponsors, partners, people that you want to thank here on this public forum. So go ahead and give those people the appreciation they deserve.
Oh yeah, I couldn't show enough love to Krug's helmets. Rooks has done wonders for me. They've really were my initial sponsor, if you will, when I first started karting, and they didn't have to do that. I mean, when I applied for that ambassadorship, I had no sort of credentials really at all, and they really went on a wing for me and was like, hey, you know what, give this kid a shot. So I couldn't thank them enough. Along with, I picked up -273 this year, the glove company, along with some shirts and stuff like that, other racing gear, and they've given me a little bit of an ambassadorship as well. So those are really my two main ones, along with the Automotive Effingham. Obviously, Dad's dealership, they've helped me out a lot. But really, yeah, that's the only three that I could really come to mind that have helped me out throughout this journey, and I couldn't be thankful enough for them.
Awesome. Where can people find you on the socials to kind of keep up with your racing journey? I know you're busy on Facebook. You got a Facebook page, Instagram, TikTok now as well. Obviously, you're on TikTok. You got to be lit for all those young people.
Oh yeah, you got to stay with the hipness. But yeah, I mean, Facebook is just Osborn Racing, and then Instagram is osborn.racing23, and then on TikTok, I believe it's COZZBORN, Osborn. So those are the three places you can find me at.
Awesome. And for all those people that want to follow Cory, and if you want to see any of the stuff that we talked about here on the show, you visit bobbykrug.com/podcast. You'll find links to all of his social media, all the links that we talked about, and my social media as well, so you guys can follow me. Once again, Cory, thank you for being on the show today.
Oh yeah, thank you, Bobby. I couldn't thank you enough for allowing me to come on to this podcast here, and I can't thank you enough for giving such a great persona to the racing industry. You've done a phenomenal job, and like I've told you before, just continue to do what you do, man, and just continue to post the content that you do, because you're one of the best in the game, in my opinion, and I love watching your stuff. So thanks for having me on, and keep doing what you're doing, man.
I appreciate that. That means a lot. I think that might be the most heartwarming thing anyone's ever said on the conclusion of the podcast to me. So, and the thing is, I know that you mean it too. I know you mean it too. That's the other thing. You also probably one of the most dedicated podcast listeners that we've had on the podcast. You always talk about all the episodes that I post when I post them too. So that's really cool. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, it's weird being on here because I always have you in my ear at work. So to hear your voice and you ask me questions is a little bit weird, but hey, I like it.
And it's even going to be more weird when you're listening back to this podcast and hearing yourself talk.
Yep, it'll be interesting for sure. Probably one of those moments where you hate to hear your voice, but hey, it is what it is.
All right. Well, Cory Osborn, thank you for being on the show. And I want to thank all of you guys for tuning in and listening to the show this week. What a great episode. Awesome to talk to Cory and hear his story. Just such a lovable guy, man. He's just so cool. So, just so excited to be rolling this podcast through. We're, however many episodes strong at this point. We're already kind of blowing season 1 out of the waters, and really just excited for the long list of guests that I have still to come on the show. So if you're not already subscribed or following me on your favorite podcast platforms, we're everywhere. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/ATA Network. So there's plenty of places that you can go to listen on this podcast. And as I like to do at the end of the show, I want to mention shopatanetwork.com. That's where you can find ATA Network merch to help, represent the show. Go out there and be a marketing asset for me, but also a little bit of the financials on the back end kind of go back to help support the show. It costs money to get it out there to your favorite airwaves, so every little bit goes a long way. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this week's show of the podcast, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode of the ATA Network podcast.